This is the videotape deposition of Elliot Mintz in the matter of Damiano versus Sony Music and Bob Dylan.
Have you ever lied to Mr. Damiano?
Yes.
Good evening, my name is Christine Boutsikaris. I'm being filmed tonight to tell you about the most controversial story in the history of rock and roll. The stealing of James Damiano's songs by Bob Dylan. It's uncontested by Bob Dylan and his law firms, all five, that Bob Dylan and people in Bob Dylan's entourage have solicited songs, music and lyrics written by James Damiano for a period of over 10 years and 11 months. I'd like to say that I was one of Bob Dylan's biggest fans and followed his career my entire life. After learning of his stealing of James Damiano's songs and the cover-up, I've lost all respect for him as an artist and a human being. Especially after learning that Bob refused to return James Damiano's entire song catalog after the lawsuit, songs that took James over 42 years of his life to write. One that comes to mind is, quote, "Racism, a diversion of reality. That the worst segregation in the world today is not between yellow, red, black, or white men, Muslims, Jews, or Christians, but between the rich and the poor." The following testimony is of a man named Tony Tiller, who worked in the office of the most powerful executive at CBS headquarters in New York. Chronologically, this deposition is a little premature. However, Mr. Tiller's position in reference to this story will be explained in more detail at a later time in the movie.
New York, New York. I will be the videographer for today. Today's date is 6/6/96. And this is the case of James Damiano versus Sony Music Entertainment Incorporated and Bob Dylan. And the case number is 95-4795. We're here at the offices of Parcher and Hayes, located at 500 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York. And this is a deposition of Tony Tiller. This time counsel will identify themselves.
Stephen Kramer for the plaintiff.
Orange Snyder and Ruth Lott for Sony Music Entertainment, Inc. and Bob Dylan.
At this time, I have the court reporter swear in the witness.
Raise your right hand, sir. Do you swear in the testimony you're about to give that you will tell the whole truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Mr. Tiller, good morning. You are employed by whom, sir?
Sony Music.
And how long have you been employed by Sony Music?
For 9 years on staff, 10 years if you count approximately a year and 2 months as temp / per diem. I was promoted to Associate Director of Marketing Services.
Did you ever have in your office any compilations of any sort of Mr. Damiano's songs that you kept on your bookshelf?
When you say compilation, what?
A folder, binder, book, tablet, material, anything.
Printed material, yes.
Okay, and draw, if you would, so I can picture it, and the jury can picture it, a verbal picture of your office, and then after you do that, where the material rested.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, so the record's clear. Are we talking about, because you may have had more than one office over the course of the years, so you might want to...
Sure, if you had more than one office, take me through it.
Okay, when I first started as a temp, I moved from office to office to cover for people who were on vacation.
Okay, just to speed it up a touch, perhaps. If you would, Mr. Tiller, limit yourself to the offices in which these materials were ever located.
Okay, my first office, I had, the door would be, say, in that corner. Over here, I had 2 file cabinets, a table, a small table to my left attached to my desk, an art desk in that corner, a bookcase right next to that, and next to that a file cabinet.
Okay, thank you.
The book that Jim had given me would be on that bookcase.
To your right.
To my right.
Okay. And what year did you receive that book initially?
I don't recall.
Okay. And what did it have in it?
It had a bunch of songs, or a bunch of, I guess, well, he called them songs, so I called them songs, but they were words written in verse form.
Was it in a binder, a folder?
It was in a binder.
Like a 3-ring binder?
3-ring binder.
And where is that today?
I do not know.
When was the last time you saw it?
When we were in the CBS building at 52 West 52nd Street.
And you're telling us and the jury you don't know what happened to those materials of songs or words?
No, I do not.
Just disappeared?
Well, when we moved from that building approximately 4 or 5 years ago, I explained to Jim, we were to pack our own desks. We were pressed to work until the day we moved, pretty much. And the movers came in and packed everything else. There were things that were left behind.
And so could you pinpoint, Mr. Tiller, what year Mr. Damiano's book of songs or words disappeared
Jack,
from your office?
You did not say disappeared. You're mischaracterizing his testimony. You did not say they disappeared.
So
Well, if you mischaracterize the testimony...
Oh, that's an exception to our stipulation? So that means during Mr. Mintz's deposition, every time you... Did Mr. Damiano's songs, Mr. Tiller, disappear?
Could I have you rephrase that?
Sure. What happened to his songs that had been on your shelf for how long?
1.5, possibly 2 years.
Okay. The songs or that binder, without that binder disappeared, did it not?
They were left in the building when we moved.
And did you ever go back to retrieve it or to ask where it was?
No, I did not. There were...
And is that building still owned by CBS? Counsel, this is the second witness in a row, literally, who received materials from the plaintiff comprising one or more of his songs, where the materials have disappeared, whether you want to use the word disappeared, lost, destroyed, evaporated, whatever phrase you want to use. And I want the record to note that this is the second witness in a row. Mr. Mintz testified that he destroyed Mr. Damiano's fax materials. And no, not only did he destroy them, he went further. He said he shredded them.
Mm-hmm.
And now Mr. Tiller is saying that the binder of materials of songs that Mr. Tiller received got lost, disappeared, don't exist. And I want that to be clear that that has occurred.
Let me now respond, sir.
Sure.
Your insinuation.
No insinuation, it's a statement of fact.
Yes, the facts speak for themselves, and your...
This is the videotape deposition of Elliot Mintz in the matter of Damiano versus Sony Music and Bob Dylan. Today's date is May 30th, 1996, and the time is 3:01 p.m. This recording is taking place at 9606 Santa Monica Boulevard in Beverly Hills, California. My name is Jeff Minger, a notary public in the state of California. I represent Kearns & Gradill's Video Services, located at 9320 Wilshire Boulevard in Beverly Hills, California. This deposition is being videotaped on behalf of the plaintiff. I'm neither counsel for, employed by, or related to any party in this action, nor am I interested in the outcome thereof. Counsel, please introduce yourselves and state your appearances.
Stephen Kramer for the plaintiff.
Orrin Snyder, and soon to be joined by Stephen Hayes for Sony Music Entertainment and Bob Dylan.
We are on the record with the court.
Mr. Mintz, have you ever gone by an alias?
Yes.
Okay, and what is that alias, sir?
Mitch Berman.
And during what what period of time have you gone under that alias?
From approximately October of 1980 through the present.
What is your profession, sir?
I'm a media consultant.
And how long have you been in that profession?
50 years.
And how long has Mr. Dillon been your client, sir?
Since, I believe, October of 1986, approximately 10 years.
And I take it you're represented today by Mr. Snyder? Is he your counsel?
Yes.
What are your duties, and what have been your duties with Mr. Dillon in the past 10 years, sir?
My duties fall under two basic categories. One is to function as a media relations person or press person between Bob and the media. And
You've spoken with Mr. Damiano?
I have.
Okay. Have you ever lied to Mr. Damiano?
Yes.
And can you list for me the times that you lied to him?
First of all of my conversations with Mr. Damiano were telephonic. To the best of my knowledge, I've never met him. During the course of telephone conversations, you're asking for a specific example.
Just so you're clear on the question, sir,
Yes.
because you just used a word that indicates to me you may not be clear. So with your permission.
Please.
I'm not looking just for examples. What I'm going to do now is I'm giving you the floor, and I want you to exhaust your recollection and tell the jury every time you lied to Mr. Damiano, and then I'll ask you, have you now exhausted your recollection? So I hear everything now.
Indeed.
Okay? Thank you, sir.
To the very best of my recollection, I may have lied to Mr. Damiano when I have told him, I can't talk with you any further. I have another call pending. I would be on the telephone. I would be buzzed, and I would tell him something very important has come up. I can't continue this. Many times, not many times, but on those occasions when he would ask me, could I pass on something to Mr. Dillon, I may have said to him, I'll try and pass it along, or words to that effect. These would be the, and of course, my name. By using the name Mitch Berman, that was not being truthful. Those are the only specific, quote, lies or mistruths that come to my mind immediately.
Okay, I take it that in preparation for this deposition, you've read what appears to be transcripts of conversations between yourself and Mr. Damiano?
I have.
Okay, and is that within the past day or two that you've done that? How recently?
I've read portions of the transcripts in the past day or two, but I read his entire booklet a year or two ago.
Okay, but... Okay.
The time is 4:23 p.m. and we're back on the record.
Mr. Crennan, you also said to me earlier that if during the course of the deposition anything else occurs to me, I should just break in.
Sure.
Even if it seems out of context.
Sure.
Under the subject of mistruths spoken to your client, during the course of these telephone conversations, he would frequently ask me to pass along information, ask questions about Bob, or to Bob about him. And I, in fact, told him that I would, and that I did. And on those occasions, that, of course, was a mistruth.
Okay. Anything else?
That's all that comes to mind at the moment.
So,
And the bounds of decency, frankly.
is that the same bounds of decency in which you accuse my client of being unstable, or is that a different bounds of decency?
Same bounds of decency.
Same bounds of decency.
Precisely.
I see.
And may I just have a word?
Of course.
Just for a second.
Yeah, sure.
Off the record.
The time is 4.
Outside.
The time is 4:15 p.m. and we're going off the record. The time is 4:23 p.m. and we're back on the record.
Mr. Freeman, you also said to me earlier that if during the course of the deposition anything else occurs to me, I should just break in.
Sure.
Even if it seems out of context.
Sure.
Under the subject of mistruths spoken to your client. During the course of these telephone conversations, he would frequently ask me to pass along information, ask questions about Bob, or to Bob about him. And I, in fact, told him that I would, and that I did. And on those occasions, that, of course, was a mistruth.
Okay. Anything else?
That's all that comes to mind at the moment.
So that if...
And when I use the expression pass along, that's a phrase that I use to suggest passing along information verbally.
Faith in people who never learn what to believe. Though I live this life of thunder, I know I've been deceived. No one deserves anything more than what they need to survive. Well, I found everything I need to live. Now all I need is what I need to die. And you can bury me in New York City. Rock and roll. Well, you can bury me in New York City. She's the heart of my soul. She's the heart of my soul. I think I'm ready for rock and roll. Well, bury me in New York City.
Few artists can lay claim to the controversy that has surrounded the career of songwriter James Damiano. 35 years ago, James Damiano began an odyssey that led him into a legal maelstrom with Bob Dylan that, to this day, fascinates the greatest of legal minds. As the curtain rises on the stage of deceit, we learn that CBS used songs and lyrics for international recording artist Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan's name is credited to the songs. One of those songs is nominated for a Grammy. The title of that song is Dignity. Since auditioning for the legendary CBS record producer John Hammond Sr., who influenced the careers of music industry icons Billie Holiday, Bob Dylan, Pete Seeger, Bruce Springsteen, and Stevie Ray Vaughan, James has engaged in a $500 million copyright infringement lawsuit with Bob Dylan. This is a story of music industry corruption and the intrigue of the little guy's daunting struggle against big business and a legal system that not only failed to work for justice and fair play, but also allowed itself to be manipulated for unprecedented reasons. In an unbelievable David and Goliath true story, we relive Damiano's seductive times with top music industry artists and agents. After his 25-year rise to the top, we then suffer with James at the malicious indifference and arrogant abuse of top industry officials. Finally, we rise with him to fight back in a court system covertly manipulated by powerfully sinister forces. James scores an enormous victory when access is established through Judge Simandl's ruling. Judge Simandl writes, "Plaintiff has demonstrated a genuine issue of material fact as to whether defendants had access to his work." The judge also ruled, "This court will accept as true plaintiff's allegation that Sony Music represented to him that he would be credited and compensated for his work if Dylan used it." We'll watch as James intrigued the industry with some of the hottest rock and roll tracks ever to be recorded. While inducting the E Street Band into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, Bruce Springsteen gave an honorable mention to Ernest Boone Carter, the drummer on Born to Run.
An honorable mention and shout out to Ernie Boone Carter, drummer who played on one song only, Born to Run. So here's to you, Ernie. Thank you.
Ernest Boone Carter also played drums on James Damiano's song, Pain in My Heart. In 1979, James Damiano read a book about Bob Dylan, in which the author made reference to a music executive named John Hammond, who worked for CBS Records. Mr. Hammond was the most sought-after record producer in the United States, and had signed Bob Dylan and Bruce Springsteen to Columbia Records. In fact, John Hammond was and probably will always be considered the most influential music executive in the world. Billie Holiday, Count Basie, Charlie Christian, Duke Ellington, Aretha Franklin, George Benson, Pete Seeger, Bob Dylan, and Bruce Springsteen, along with many other artists, including Stevie Ray Vaughan, were John Hammond affiliates. Inspired by the book James read, he decided to call CBS Records on the phone. James asked for John Hammond's office, and Mikey Harris answered the phone. Mikey Harris is a board member of the National Academy of Popular Music's Songwriters Hall of Fame. Mikey was John Hammond's only tenured assistant at CBS and attended to Mr. Hammond's affairs. James told Mikey that he was a songwriter. He had a few seconds to listen to one lyric. She replied yes by saying, "Shoot." James then recited a lyric to her and said, "The lyric is, just think how beautiful you'd feel if you knew your love was real." Within a few seconds, he could tell Mikey liked the lyric. Before the conversation ended, Mikey made it explicit that she wanted James to call her any time between the hours of 9 to 5. So began a relationship that lasted 10 years and 11 months. Ernest Boone Carter recorded on James Damiano's song, "Where Are You, Jesus?"
My world possessed without confusion and pain. I've been reborn, I've been through the storm and baptized in acid rain. And I was only trying to keep myself from crying. Well, the devil must be to blame. Where are you, Jesus? It's about time you claim your fortune of fame. And tomorrow, so why not live for today? I'll leave you with all the sorrow, just as long as you promise to pray. 'Cause what good is a man who needs love that bad? Can't you understand? Doesn't have to be that sad. as long as your kindness no pain. Just what good is a man who needs love like that? Can't you understand? Doesn't have to be the same. I can feel disaster coming on faster as the years slip by so fast. I want to try and help mankind, but it's such an incredible task. 'Cause I can see no future in problems that can't be solved. But man himself's the only threat that remains unresolved. Where are you, Jesus? It's about time you claim your fortune to fade. Well, where are you, Jesus? It's about time you claim your fortune to fade. Well, where are you, Jesus? It's about time you claim your fortune to fade.
Since the beginning of his involvement with Mikey Harris, James had been sending her tapes that he recorded at home. After some time of talking on the phone, sending lyric sheets of songs to Mikey, as well as bringing his music up to her at CBS Records, Mikey asked him if he would like to audition for Mr. Hammond. James accepted the invitation. A week later, Mikey called James and said that she had set up an audition for 3 months from that date. The audition would be at Mr. Hammond's office in the Media Sound Building in New York on West 57th Street at 11 o'clock in the morning. James was excited and called a person who he was working with at the time named Alan LeWinter. Alan worked with Don Kirshner and was the manager for the band Kansas. Alan was a cool guy, well-mannered, polite, modest, just your all-around classy person. An artistic guy whose greatest attribute was his sincerity. It seemed Alan's job was to seek out talent in the suburbs for Don Kirshner. Alan respected Mr. Hammond immensely and was looking forward to going to the audition with James. The days counted down to 3 nights before the audition, and James couldn't sleep. He stayed up all day and again through to the following night, but was still unable to sleep. Finally, the night before the audition, James had been up for 2 consecutive days with no sleep. It was now 12 midnight again, and James laid in bed, wide awake, his heart pounding, adrenaline pumping. 1 a.m. rolled around. James was still wide awake. Around 2:30, he went downstairs, grabbed a bottle of tequila, and drank the entire bottle. Within a half an hour, he finally fell asleep. The audition was for 11 o'clock in the morning. James woke up at 7, jumped in the shower, hopped into the car, and drove to New York. He picked up Alan LeWinter, and they drove across town to the west side where Mr. Hammond's office was located. James parked the car, grabbed his guitar, and he and Alan started walking to Mr. Hammond's office. Suddenly, James was feeling ill, dehydrated from drinking tequila and the lack of sleep. Alan quickly started to help James pull himself together, saying, "You could do this. I know you could do this. Pull yourself together. You could do this." James thought to himself, "Alan just has no clue what I went through the last 3 days and how sick I feel." Anyway, James had no other alternative but to pull himself together. When they arrived at the office, Mikey was waiting and asked James if he'd like to tune his guitar. James said yes, and she brought James into a recording studio where she pointed to a piano and said, "You could tune your guitar to this piano. It's the piano that Billy Joel recorded Piano Man on." James tuned his guitar and followed Mikey back up to Mr. Hammond's office. Mikey introduced James and Alan to Mr. Hammond, and they all shook hands. Mr. Hammond sat down at his desk. Knowing that James and Bruce Springsteen were from the same town and knew one another, he started out the conversation with a comment about Bruce Springsteen. They talked for a short time, and Mr. Hammond asked to hear a song. Instead, James handed him a lyric sheet and asked him to read it. It was titled "Dignity." After reading the song, Mr. Hammond alarmingly looked up and asked James if he was a college graduate. James answered no, and Mr. Hammond shed a sigh of relief. It was a great sign for James knowing that Mr. Hammond would never have worked with an artist that had been schooled. Mr. Hammond asked to hear a song. Among the songs James played were "Nothing Left to Say," "Lonely with Love," "Living Proof," and "Dignity." The song that Mr. Hammond read at the audition was untitled at the time, but identified with 2 separate names. One of the identifications of this song was "Just Say Yes to Me." The second was "Dignity." James copyrighted "Dignity" with the Library of Congress in 1982 and in 1988. 12 years later, Bob Dylan was nominated for a Grammy for a song titled "Dignity," released on his 1994 Bob Dylan's Greatest Hits album, and also on MTV's Bob Dylan Unplugged album and DVD. "Dignity" was nominated for a Grammy in the Best Rock Song category. James Damiano's copyright registration included the melody line and lyrical hook of "Dignity." Bob Dylan's copyright registration, produced to the court by his attorneys, stated that Dylan's first copyright registration to the Library of Congress was December of 1991, a full 9 years after James Damiano's registration. Musicologist Dr. Paul Green who graduated from Harvard magna cum laude, stated that James Damiano's melody line, copyrighted in 1982, is the exact melodic arc as Bob Dylan's 1994 melody line of Dignity.
For you today, a melodic analysis and comparison of the main melody of Steel Guitars by James Damiano to the main melody of Dignity by Bob Dylan. I define melody as the sequence or ordering of pitches in a single line of a musical composition. That is, melody is the ordering of pitches, which are often referred to as numbers, one being the number of the pitch center or tonic of the composition. And melody is distinct from rhythm, which specifies the timing and the duration of those notes. Analysis will cover the main melody of Steel Guitars and the main melody of Dignity, which I find to be strikingly similar. To begin, I'd like to illustrate the similarity of these two melodies by playing for you what I identify to be the common features themselves, a melodic arc of shared melodic features between these two compositions. This melodic arc is the pitches 1, followed by the pitches 5, 6, 1, and then after a gap, proceeding to the pitches 2, 3, 1. These pitches constitute what I call a melodic arc in that they bear with them something of the character of the melodic phrase, starting with 1, ending with 1, proceeding in certain patterns in between, particularly the 5, 6, 1 progression in between, and the ending with the 2, 3, 1. There's a kind of a melodic character to this arc, more than just a set of shared pitches. What I will be doing shortly is I'll be leading you through an analysis, allowing you to hear how Steel Guitars actually projects this exact same arc as Dignity. First, what I will be doing shortly is I'll be leading you through an analysis, allowing you to hear how Steel Guitars actually projects this exact same arc as Dignity. First, what I'd like to do would be to play for you this melodic arc and then play for you Dignity, so that you can hear the similarity between this arc, which it consists of the shared pitches between the two melodies, and Dignity itself. So this is the common arc, the common shared pitches of the two melodies, of the two main melodies of Steel Guitars and Dignity. I'm going to play that to the rhythm of Dignity so that you can hear how this melody, when set to the rhythm of Dignity, sounds very similar to Dignity. So this is the common arc. Now that melody should sound very similar to the main melody of Dignity, which is this. As I conclude in my analysis submitted as a written declaration, I find these two melodies strikingly similar. Okay, now as I've mentioned, the melody of Steel Guitars involves a lot of repeated, kind of noodled figures, so that you have you also have, okay, this kind of repetitive embellishment can be reduced to a more simple form by simply reducing the repeated fragments so that we eliminate the noodling. We end up with this. So I'm going to play the melody of Steel Guitars, eliminating repeated notes, repeated melodic fragments against the rhythm and accompaniment of Dignity. As I do so, I want to point out that I have altered none of the notes. I have only, as I said before, lowered or raised a few notes, one register or octave. All of the notes from the melody are still present in this steel guitar melody. The only thing is that I have eliminated some of the noodling, and it sounds like this. So once again, that is the melody of steel guitars, with all of the notes still intact. The only thing that has happened is I've eliminated some of the noodling, and 3 notes have been changed. The register they're heard in, instead of a high A, we hear a low A, that kind of thing. Here is, for comparison, the main melody of Dignity. Here is, for comparison, the main melody of Dignity. So this should demonstrate that there is a striking similarity between the melodies of these two compositions. The only difference between them is that 3 notes from steel guitars have been changed from 1 octave above to 1 octave below, and that some of the noodling has been reduced. As I have mentioned, the idea of changing the octave or register that a pitch is heard in, and the idea of eliminating or introducing noodling, these are very common melodic embellishments, and in most musicological analyses are considered actually kind of almost insignificant melodic developments. These are considerable as the same melody in a lot of ways. The common pitches then, to reiterate, are 1, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 1. And once more, I'll play the common arc, that is those pitches that are shared in common between steel guitars and Dignity, and then I'll play for your comparison Dignity, so that you can hear the 2 melodies against each other and compare them and see how similar they are. That was the common melodic arc. This is Dignity, as released. This concludes my melodic analysis and comparison. I also should direct your attention to the written document, the declaration, that accompanies this cassette.
Danny Gallagher, a good friend of Bruce Springsteen, was a great steel guitar player. James asked Danny if he would put a dobro guitar track on steel guitars, also identified as Dignity on James Damiano's 1982 copyright registration. Steel Guitars was recorded by Bob Dylan and nominated for a Grammy as the Best Rock Song of the Year. Danny brought a friend named Mario Phillips who played the electric track. Danny and Springsteen remained close friends up until Danny's passing in 2007. Danny Gallagher signed a declaration stating that he played the dobro guitar track on James Damiano's song Steel Guitars. Vinnie Lopez, who was inducted by Bruce Springsteen into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2014, was a signed witness to Danny Gallagher's signature. All facts were recorded on video, as you will now witness.
That's the song. 18 Terrace, Dublin 8, Ireland. I recorded songs with Jim Damiano in the year of 1986. I am recording my reading of this tape on a tape cassette. As it is being videotaped. I, Danny Gallagher, declared in 1986 I played and recorded the dobro guitar track on James Damiano's instrumental song Steel Guitars, although I didn't know it was called that at the time. The song I am referring to is in the statement number 5 of this declaration. It's the same song that is playing in the background right here. I can swear to that tape segment. Playing in the background of the tape segment of this declaration. A week after Jim and I recorded this song, Jim told me that he went to New York and submitted a copy of this to Mike Harris at CBS Records.
Let me give a pen.
Turns out to be
You want to sign?
Harris.
You got
This side.
a regular. You guys gave me the same pen.
And rolling pins. Mine's green. This is the what, Dave? 27. 27. 1996. It's 11:02 p.m. It says that right in the camera. Thank you very much. Good night, please.
Now, this one here has to read too.
The same as here.
It just says that you're known as Jack.
Okay. I resided 1800 Terrace in Dublin, Ireland. I'm known as Dan Gallagher. I was born in Neptune, New Jersey. My full name is Daniel Everett Gallagher. I'm a musician and play the dobro. In 1986, I recorded the dobro guitars of James Damiano's song, Steel Guitars. Mario Phillips and James Damiano played the other two guitars that I heard as time recorded. Soon after James, Mario, and I recorded Steel Guitars, Mr. Damiano told me that he went to New York to give a copy of the recording to Mikey Harris at CBS Records. I am the same person whose name is mentioned in the book written about Bruce Springsteen, Thunder Road.
Now, your full name is Danny Gallagher? Then you have to write that. Did you see the down by the road? You didn't see the book? You want to see? You're in the book here.
The bootleg of what was that name? I forgot.
Mark Elliott.
Whatever.
Yeah.
I read some of it. It just didn't make that much sense. 27. January. Year of 1996. There it is. What's it? What?
You could just sign this because we need a couple witnesses. Nick's going to sign it. Can I get ready to sign it?
Yeah. At what time? We're starting right now. 11:04 p.m.
Oh, no, at Asbury Park.
Yeah. Coming in now.
Yeah. And you have to sign with the witnesses and witness, just sign with it. No.
Yeah, get it with.
Sign your name and then just, and then print your name next to
Steve
it.
Schreiber. Steve Schreiber. He's a hand. You heard of Polish hands? This is a Jewish hand. It's a Jewish dilemma. Hand on sale. There you go. Signature, right? It's still rolling. That's correct.
Standing in front of me, fresh out of jail, his head shaved, in the Mermaid Room of the Upstage Club in Asbury Park. He told me that he had a money-making outfit called Speed Limit 25. They were looking for a guitarist, and was I interested? I was broke, so I was. But so the genesis point of the E Street Band was actually a group that Vinny Lopez asked me to join to make a few extra dollars on the weekend.
Yeah. All right. Bad man. Show me where. Right there, right on the chart. Well, I don't know what they need. They're getting two. Toward us. We did have to go there. No, right. You know, Bill's trying to say it like a song. I do. He said, they're saying that I never had a song copyright. There you go. We are arranged. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Good night, Cleveland. Thank you. Appreciate it, man. There's theater for you.
This is the first song that James submitted to Mr. Hammond at CBS Records.
is James Damiano, and you filed a copyright infringement lawsuit against Bob Dylan, right? Is that correct? Now, I read on your website you auditioned for the legendary John Hammond Sr. of CBS. Is this correct?
Yes, I did.
Bobby had a point of view, and Bobby had a great wit, and he did a Talking New York blues on his first album, and he had hung around a lot with Woody Guthrie, and he identified with the underprivileged and the downtrodden, but he did it with great wit and humor. And
did you have a hard time selling him to the record executive?
Oh, hopeless. I mean, they said, well, he was called Hammond's Folly. I mean, they were. There was a vice president there who was so angry with me because he knew this was going to louse up CBS's name. You know, the voice was so terrible, and
not a great guitar player.
No, but it didn't matter. He was an original, and you know that's what you gotta look for, you know, in an artist.
Did you ever, for a moment, have any doubts that Dylan would become the force that?
None whatsoever. They tried to fire him after his first album, and I said, over my dead body. This is one time I did win.
You said if he goes, you go.
Oh, I said if he goes, I will absolutely. I'll leave, of course.
I want to hear your...
I was a very lucky guy, though. I was a guy who had discovered the president of Columbia Records, a guy called Goddard Lieberson.
You discovered him as well?
Yeah, I got him his job in 1939. So I did have a little cushion to fall back on there.
Ask you a few questions if we may.
Have a seat.
Thank you very much. I'll ask you a few things, and then Maria will ask you a few things. First, I'd like to thank you for granting us permission to do this interview. I have something here now. So your name is James Damiano, and you filed a copyright infringement lawsuit against Bob Dylan, right? Is that correct? Now, I read on your website you auditioned for the legendary John Hammond Sr. of CBS. Is this correct?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Could you tell us how this audition came about, please?
Well, I had read a book, in 1979 I read a book about Bob Dylan, and it mentioned John Hammond Sr., who was responsible for the careers of a lot of artists like Count Basie, Duke Ellington, Aretha Franklin, George Benson, Pete Seeger, Charlie Christian. And so I called CBS, and I asked to be put through to his office. And they put me through. And a lady named Mikey Harris answered the phone.
Okay.
And I told her I was a lyricist. And I asked her if she'd like to hear one lyric. And she said, shoot. So I said, the lyric is, just think how beautiful you'd feel if you knew your love was real.
Great. Very good. Now, Marie has a...
So true.
Thanks.
And, you know, I was just telling her these lyrics on the phone, and she liked them.
I like what you wrote. That's really...
Yeah, we got along very well. I was surprised that she stayed on the phone with me for 35 minutes, being she was such a... She was a very big person. She was John Hammond's only tenured assistant the last 10 years of his career at CBS Records. And it was an important position. She produced Stevie Ray Vaughan, and it goes on from there.
She was an important person in the music business. She was really important.
Yeah, she was very nice. She liked the lyrics, and when we got off the phone, before we got off the phone, she told me that she was there from 9 to 5 and that I should call her anytime I'd like. So I started calling her about, I'd say, 3 times a week and reciting lyrics to her on the phone. And the relationship evolved from there. It evolved into like a
Friendship.
I'm sorry?
Friendship.
Yeah, it was a working friendship.
So then you auditioned for Mr. Hammond, right? Afterwards?
Yeah, she I started sending her music cassettes. I was home cassettes. I started sending her music and keeping in contact with her, and I would send her maybe a tape a week. And then after about 8 months, she invited me up to CBS. So I went up and I talked with her. And then I went back home to the shore. I kept on writing songs. And then about another 8 months went by, and she invited me back up to CBS. And I went back up, and she, out of the clear blue sky, asked me if I'd like to audition for John Hammond, Sr.
She helped you edit your lyrics or rewrite or?
After the audition, we started working very heavily together. And I'd go to her house, and I'd spend 2-3 weeks at a time, and we would work on songs and material. And she would critique and edit the songs. And that lasted for about 8 years. We did that for about 8 years. And I had people
from 79 to 80. Well.
We made it to the end. It is New York City. Good night, good night, good night. We made it. Thank you.
The relationship between Mr. Hammond, CBS Records, Mikey and James continued for over 11 years. James kept submitting material. Musicians that James was playing with at the time would go to CBS Records with him. He would bring Mikey and Mr. Hammond new songs that he had written. In 1982, Mikey sent James a Christmas card. Dear Jim, wishing you a splendid Christmas and a most prosperous New Year. And it was signed, Love, Mikey, Randy, Duke, and Nikki too. December 1982. On June 6, 1987, Mikey wrote a letter to James stating, Dear Jim, thanks for sharing your lyrics/poetry with me. To me, your work represents a lot of time and effort, but from an artistic point of view, I feel that it is representative of poetry rather than a song in today's commercial market of music. Since no tape accompanied the words, I have no way of what your ideas are with regard to the music. I just wish that there was some way for me to be of help to you. But with things the way they are, especially regarding Mr. Hammond's health, my hands are tied. Our office has not, at least since I've been associated with John Hammond, been actively involved with publishing, which is something I suggested you try with your material several years ago. I still maintain that this is the best route for you to take. Publishers can reach major artists and guide you with regard to your material. On the basis of the material that you have just now presented to me, I think it might stand a stronger chance of being recognized as a volume of straight poetry rather than songs. Because of Mr. Hammond's policy with regard to his relationships with artists he has worked with, I will not be able to present your material to Bob Dylan. Jim, I wish you the best, but surely you know this by now, after all these years. and I'm only sorry that our office can't be of assistance to you. Take care, Mikey. When James received a letter from Mikey Harris stating that she could not be of assistance to him, he called her at CBS and asked to speak to her. A man answered the phone and told him that Mikey was not there. His name was Tony Tiller, and he said that he was watching over Mr. Hammond's office while Mikey was out. Mr. Tiller then asked James if he was the person who wrote the material on Mr. Hammond's desk. James asked him what material he was referring to, and he replied, "The songs in the big black notebook." James replied, "Yes," and they started to converse about the songs. He told James that he liked them and invited him up to CBS to meet with him. On July 10, 1987, Anthony Tiller called James to tell him that Mr. Hammond had died. A few weeks later, Mikey Harris was asked to leave CBS. Tony Tiller remained, and James started working with Tony, which he continued to do for 4 more years. Scott Patterson testified that he met Mikey Harris at a party at Tony Tiller's house. Scott Patterson was the engineer on James Damiano's song, My Cousin Joanne.
You said you met Mikey Harris through her son Duke.
No, I met Mikey Harris first at Tony Tiller's house at a party. That's when I met Mikey Harris.
Sometime around the end of June 1988, Mr. Tiller called James and asked if he would like tickets to the Bob Dylan 4th of July concert at Jones Beach Theater in Long Island, stating to James that he should bring his songs to the concert and try to get them to Bob Dylan. James accepted the invitation, and on July 4th, 1988, a very significant special date to James, he headed to the concert. The following testimony describes what happened at the July 4th Jones Beach concert.
Let's go back to the Jones Beach concert, if we may, to the time when you offered the tickets to Mr. Damiano before the concert actually took place. Okay? During that point in time when you offered the tickets to him and before he actually went to the concert, did you ever say to him or suggest to him that maybe he should bring some of his songs with him?
No, I did not.
Do you deny saying that, or is it you just don't recall one way or the other?
I deny suggesting to Jim that he bring songs along with him. I did, however, concur with him when he asked me, "Do you think I should bring my songs with me?" I said, "Sure, why not? What could it hurt?"
A concert at Jones Beach in Long Island on July 1st, 1988, and that was a Bob Dylan concert. Is that correct?
Correct.
And you and Mr. Damiano went alone to the concert?
Yes.
And how did you get the tickets?
The tickets were complimentary from a man by the name of Anthony Tiller.
And how do you know the tickets were complimentary from Anthony Tiller?
Because my husband had spoken with Anthony Tiller on the telephone and made an arrangement that tickets would be given
And you
for
know
this
that
concert.
I'm sorry, and you know that from what your husband told you and from also listening to your husband on the telephone, is that correct? Or just the first, not the second?
A little of both.
Okay, why don't you tell us how you know that the tickets
Well,
were
I knew they were on
complimentary?
on the telephone and having a conversation about this.
Okay. As you sit here today, do you remember that your husband was on the phone with Mr. Tiller in 1988?
Yes.
You have a picture of that happening in 1988?
Yes.
And where were your seats at the concert?
We were seated not on the lower deck. It seemed like it was an upper deck to the left-hand side of the stadium. I don't know if you want to call it a stadium or amphitheater or that type of setup. We were facing the stage. The stage was down below. There was one, maybe two tiers, and then we were up on an upper left-hand tier.
And how many other people were sitting in your row?
We were the only two.
And did either you or Mr. Damiano have songs with you at the concert?
Jim had songs.
And were they in a book or loose papers in an envelope?
Keep your voice up if you would. I know it's late, but...
Seems to me they were loose papers.
And did he have an envelope with him?
Yes.
And he didn't have any tapes with him, did he?
I'm not sure. I can't remember. Yes.
Do you know where those are?
No.
How do you know he kept it? Your husband, in his various statements that he has submitted, stated that you and he went backstage after the concert.
Correct.
And for a period of about 45 minutes waited until you allegedly saw Mr. Dillon. Does that sound about right?
Yes.
Now I have some documents that I'd like to show you. Well, before I show you the documents, why don't you tell us what happened after the concert, as best as you can recall, on July 1st, 1988.
Right.
At Jones Beach.
Right. Okay. The concert finished. We walked outside. We walked over towards it seemed like a gate over to the side. The gate was locked. It was raining, started raining. There was a guard that came up to the gate. And after that, it seemed like the gate had been unlocked. We walked through this gate, walked down seemed like a long roadway that led around to the back of the stage area. When we walked back there, we were the only two back there. There was a platform, like a wooden platform that we sat down on, and Jim started to go through his various lyric pages, putting the best ones he felt on top. And I stood there. I stood up, and at that point, a man walked out of the back door, looked at us, looked at Jim, looked at I, and then he turned around and walked back in this back door. And then the door opened again, and a group of people walked out the back door. And as they started to walk, I looked up and I recognized a person, Bob Dylan. And I said to Jim, "There he is. There's Bob." And at that time, he was up to about the first step to the bus, the tour bus that they were walking to. And he stopped before he got onto the bus and took a step onto the bottom step, looked back at us, and by that time Jim had stood up, started to walk over towards him. Mr. Dillon started to walk back, and another person walked in between the two of them and put down his arm And then it seemed like, I couldn't hear exactly what was being said, but it seemed like someone said, you know, what are you doing here, or what is this? And Jim handed the book, started to hand the book to him, and then someone else came over and took the lyric, whether it was a book or an envelope with the lyrics in it, took this package and walked towards the bus along with the other people, and they all got onto the bus, the door closed, and the bus drove away.
As you will witness in the following phone conversation between Tony Tiller and James Damiano, James informs Mr. Tiller that he is writing a book called 11 Years, and asks Mr. Tiller if it would be all right to put in the book that Mr. Tiller instructed him to go backstage at a Dylan concert at Jones Beach and give his material to Bob in person. Mr. Tiller replies, "No, don't do that, because that would make me, as an employee of the company, liable for telling you to do that, and that would be uncool." The purpose of this is to simply demonstrate that Mr. Tiller did in fact instruct James to provide Bob Dylan with his songs. Given that fact, one could logically surmise that Mr. Tiller told James Damiano to bring material to Bob Dylan at other Bob Dylan concerts.
Hello?
Tom.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Oh, boy, you're a hard guy to get a
You
hold.
didn't call me back yesterday.
Well, yeah, I did, and you left.
What time did you call?
About 5 minutes after you were talking to Germany or something.
Jeez. Well, it's unfortunate that you chose right now to call.
Oh, really? I just need to ask you one question.
Okay.
Real fast. I'm going to Nashville. I wrote a book. Okay? Remember when you said that if your promotion, remember your promotion, you said if you got a promotion into A&R, I would have been the first person you signed? Would you write me a letter to that effect before I go? I'm going in 2 weeks to meet some people in Nashville about my songs.
Yeah.
Could you write me a letter just so when I get down there I could show them that, that they were serious about the music, that you were at least serious about the music?
Yeah.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Okay, well, I really have to go, though.
Okay.
The other call is costing a mint.
I'm sorry?
The other call is costing a mint while they're on hold.
Oh.
And I'm hoping they'll still be there when I get back.
Okay, let me ask you one real fast question, okay? I wrote a book. Did Mitch call you?
Recently?
Yeah.
No.
I wrote a book. I just thought, is it all right to put in the book that you told me to go backstage at Jones Beach to give Dylan material?
No.
Don't put that in the book.
No.
I'm sorry?
No, do not.
I can't put that in the book.
No, because that would make me as an employee of the company liable for telling you to do that, and that would be uncool.
Okay.
But I have to go.
Okay,
I'll talk to you soon, Jim.
Okay, thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
2 months after the Jones Beach concert, Tony Tiller called James and asked him if James had any more songs he could submit to Bob Dylan. James told him that he had some songs that were not, as of yet, typed up, but that he could copy the songs quickly by hand if he had to. Tony then told James that Dylan was playing at Waterloo Village in Byram, New Jersey, and that if he wanted to go to the concert, he would get James tickets. James told him that he would go since it was so close to where he was living at the time. After asking James how many tickets he wanted, Tony told James that he would call him back to let him know where to pick up the tickets. James then called his friend, Brad Wright, and asked him if he wanted to go. The following testimony of Brad Wright describes what happened backstage at the Waterloo concert.
So you met Sandy and you had the tickets before the concert, correct? Waterloo we're talking about.
We had our 2 tickets.
And what, if anything, happened with regard to Mr. Damiano before this concert?
He was on the phone with somebody. You know, I could only hear it, and I don't remember his conversation, but he was talking about the tickets, and there'll be tickets. He was trying to get 4 tickets for the show.
Well, let's back up for a minute. Let's back up for a minute.
Sure.
Did there come a time when Mr. Damiano called you about the Waterloo concert?
Oh, I'm not sure who called who.
At some point, you and he started talking about the Waterloo concert.
Yes.
What happened next with regard to you and he going to the Waterloo concert together?
Well, I think I was already planning on going.
Right.
Because I had my tickets already when I got to Jimmy's house. I know I've had my tickets already, so.
So there came a time when you went to Mr. Damiano's house?
Before the show, and he was planning on going too.
Was that the day of the show?
Yes.
And you went to his house for the purpose of going to the show together?
Yes.
At the time, he was trying to get 4 tickets to the show?
Yes. On the phone.
You already had 2 tickets.
Right.
And he was going to get 4 to give you 2 on the theory that maybe he can get better tickets?
That may have been his thinking at the time.
Okay, and what happened next?
Well, when we got to the show, he went to the window, and there was 4 tickets there for him.
And did you and Sandy and Pam and Mr. Damiano go to the concert?
We walked in. Yes, we did go to the concert. I didn't know how good his seats were, so me and Sandy kept the tickets that we originally had. And I wish I didn't do that because his seats were a lot better, but I wish I didn't do that because his seats were much better.
Because you could have scalped them and just taken his, right?
I could have scalped mine and set with his, but instead I did the opposite.
Right.
To get some money for Pam. And they weren't going to sell them. And I said, Pam, why don't I go try to sell these for you? And she liked the idea, and so I went back to the line, and I sold them for a cost, face value. I didn't scalp them.
So you sold...
Face value, and I gave the money to Pam.
You sold your 2 tickets that you had previously bought?
No, I wish I did that. I sold 2 of the tickets that he received at the window.
I see.
Right.
And you sat in your seats?
Yes.
And they sat in their seats?
Yes.
Where were your seats?
Way off to the left of the stage. Very corner left, and it was maybe a dozen rows back or something.
On the floor?
Yeah, it's under the 10, yeah.
Under the
10. Sorry.
And how did it come that you scalped their 2 as opposed to your 2?
Well, I think I said I wasn't sure how good his seats were. I don't know what I was thinking at the time, whether I got my tickets earlier and maybe they were better, but I don't know. I sold their 2 tickets. I wish I didn't because they had much nicer seats.
And do you remember how much you got for the 2 tickets?
No, it was face value, whatever it was. I don't know.
Okay. As you're selling the tickets for face value...
If they had them at the box office, they weren't sold out.
Sure, I understand. As you're selling them the tickets, you then watch the concert from your seats,
yes,
off on the side, and Mr. Damiano, Mrs. Damiano sat
with the other 2 people.
The 2 people.
Yes, a couple that I sold the tickets to, and they said excellent seats. Thanks.
And what, if anything, did Mr. Damiano tell you about where he got the 4 seats on the night in question?
Okay.
And sir,
yes,
when I say on the night in question, I'm asking you to tell us whether you remember if he said anything to you about where he got the tickets on the night in question, as opposed to some other time.
I remember him being on the phone in the kitchen for about 15, 20 minutes talking to some guy about the tickets. And I only know he said the guy's name, Anthony Tiller, but he didn't. I mean, that's all I know.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And do you remember where Mr. Damiano's seats were?
They were, I would say, pretty much on center, maybe 6 rows back, maybe more, maybe less. I don't know. They were nice seats.
And now, prior to the concert, what, if anything, did Mr. Damiano tell you about why he was going to the concert?
We had a book of songs that Jimmy composed, and we were gonna give them to Bob. I was gonna meet Bob.
You were gonna meet Bob?
Yes, I was hoping to.
Okay, and why don't you tell us about what caused you to hope that you were going to meet Bob that night?
Well, when I saw the tickets that were there at the window, I was pretty sure I was going to meet Bob that night.
Why is that?
Because he was, I don't know, he said we were gonna.
Mr. Damiano told you he was going to meet Bob.
Well, we're going to give songs to Bob, yes.
And did he tell you, sir, that he had a date with Mr.
No, I still, believe it. When I see it, I kind of had that kind of an attitude, but...
Well, my question is, what did Mr. Damiano tell you about what was going to happen?
Well, we had a manila yellow envelope with songs in it and a demo tape of Another Justification, and we were going to give that to Bob.
Okay, my question to you, sir, is what did Mr. Damiano tell you about what was going to happen after the concert, before the concert ended?
That was the whole plan, that we were going to meet with Bob and give him the songs, see what he thinks.
And this is something that he told you was going to happen?
Well,
as opposed to something that he hoped would happen?
Yeah, I don't know which he hoped. I kind of hoped, and he thought it was more than hope, no more.
And did he tell you why he believed that he was going to meet Mr. Dillon? After the concert in Waterloo Village on September 10th, 1988?
Why he believes.
As you will witness in the following phone conversation between Tony Tiller and James Damiano, James informs Mr. Tiller that he is writing a book called 11 Years, and asks Mr. Tiller if it would be all right to put in the book that Mr. Tiller instructed him to go backstage at a Dylan concert at Jones Beach and give his material to Bob in person. Mr. Tiller replies, "No, don't do that, because that would make me, as an employee of the company, liable for telling you to do that, and that would be uncool." The purpose of this is to simply demonstrate that Mr. Tiller did in fact instruct James to provide Bob Dylan with his songs. Given that fact, one could logically surmise that Mr. Tiller told James Damiano to bring material to Bob Dylan at other Bob Dylan concerts.
Is it all right to put in the book that you told me to go backstage at Jones Beach to give Dylan material?
No.
Don't put that in the book.
No.
I'm sorry?
No, do not.
I can't put that in the book.
No, because that would make me as an employee of the company liable for telling you to do that, and that would be uncool.
Okay.
But I have to go.
Okay, Ian.
I'll talk to you soon, Jim.
Okay, thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
No, well, sir, I got the impression somehow, but I'm not sure.
Well, sir, did he tell you that he and Mr. Dillon had spoken on the telephone and arranged to meet backstage after the concert?
Not him and Dillon, no.
Did he tell you that Mr. Dillon sent him a letter beforehand, arranging to meet him backstage after the concert?
No.
Did he tell you that Mr. Dillon's manager and he had spoken and arranged for Mr. Damiano to meet Mr. Dillon backstage after the concert?
Not exactly in those words, but it was, if Anthony Tiller's his manager, that's, I don't know.
Well, what impression, sir, did you have before you went backstage about what was going to happen?
I was under the impression that we were going to meet, that I was finally going to get to meet Bob. I'm sorry, I was under the impression that we were going to finally, I was going to finally get to meet with Bob Dylan.
Try to keep it at that level.
Okay, sorry.
And sir, what did Mr. Damiano tell you, as best you can remember, that led you to believe that you were finally going to get to meet Bob Dylan backstage at Waterloo on September 10th, 1988? Not the exact words, but what in substance did he tell you?
It wasn't so much what he told me, it was when we got there and the tickets, we got the 4 tickets at the window, and then I was under the impression Jimmy was on the level and all with me, I didn't know if all he was saying is true or not.
On the level about what?
About that we're going to get to meet with Bob.
And you said all that he was saying. What was he saying about what would happen backstage?
Well, this is all.
What was he? What I'm trying to establish is what it is that he was saying when he was rambling on.
That we're going to meet with Bob. It would be in no time. We're going to sit down, and he's going to sit down and write with him. He wants to do that.
Fine. And did he tell you he came to believe that?
Not so much telling you, but if he told me anything, all right, I was under the impression that he was working with people that were very close to Bob.
Did Mr. Damiano tell you, in substance, that he was working with people very close to Bob, which would enable him, after this concert, to sit down with Bob Dylan?
I certainly got that impression. Whether he told me or how I got that impression, I'm not sure. I can't remember.
You got that impression from words that you had with Mr. Damiano?
Yes. I can't remember exactly how.
Do you remember whether he told you what position Mr. Tiller had?
Oh, no.
Well, did you believe, before going backstage, that Mr. Tiller was someone who was, as you said, close to Bob Dylan?
At the time, I didn't believe anything, unless I see it myself.
Okay, I understand that. My question was a bad one. Did Mr. Damiano tell you, in substance, that Mr. Tiller was close to Bob Dylan?
Yes.
Do you remember what he said about that subject?
No. I know they talked on the phone, Remember, he mentioned Anthony Tiller a number of times to me.
And when he mentioned Anthony Tiller a number of times to you, was that at about the same time, 1988?
Yeah.
What did he say when he mentioned Anthony Tiller?
Oh, boy. He was working with him, and he was giving Anthony his music. He was giving music that he wrote to Tiller and hoping that it would get him somewhere.
Did Mr. Damiano tell you in substance that Tony Tiller had arranged for him to go backstage after Waterloo to meet with Bob Dylan?
Well, yes.
You said you were carrying a manila yellow envelope which contained written lyrics plus a demo tape of Another Justification?
Yes.
How many songs were in the envelope?
I'd say a stack about a quarter inch.
What, if anything, did he tell you about what was in the envelope?
Oh, I knew what was in the envelope.
How did you know that?
I knew that they were songs beforehand. That's why we bring them.
Okay, sir. What happened at the end of the concert?
Well, walked back to where Jim was sitting. And me and Sandy met with Jimmy and Pam and the couple that I sold the tickets to that were sitting next to Jimmy and Pam, and he said, "Thank you, excellent seats." And I said, "Yeah, great."
Too bad you enjoyed them.
Yes. And so we walked backstage with the envelope, and then at this time I took the envelope and we walked. I see backstage is all outside, so it was we walked behind the curtains to the left of the stage, facing it, and we walked by two bodyguards, big guys, and they just parted and they just made way for us as we walked up to the bus. Maybe the bus was thinking back.
And sir, you didn't actually go on stage. You said you went to the left around the stage?
Yes, it's all outside, so the only stage is that stage where they perform on, and everything else is pretty much outside.
How many security guards did you see?
I saw two.
And you said they parted?
They let us go. I mean, we didn't actually walk between them, but we walked right by. They didn't question us or anything, but they did see us.
And who went backstage? You, Pamela Damiano?
Me, Pam, Jim, and Sandy. And we walked back past the guards and up to the bus, but the girls didn't follow us right up to the bus. They stood or not.
When you were backstage, what did you see?
There was a bus.
Can you describe the bus?
It was a big bus. It was a big, like a charter type.
Just one bus?
Just one bus. That were backstage, yes, behind the stage, yes. Right up next to the bus, me and Jim were the ones that walked up to the bus.
But when you were backstage in that area, you didn't see any technicians or...
Oh, if there were, they were people off in the distance, and I just wasn't paying attention. And it was maybe a handful of people if there was. Two guards, I do remember.
What did they look like, those guards?
They were big guys. They're both white. And that's about all I can tell you. They were big, strapping-looking dudes.
Did anyone in your group before have any words or verbal exchange with the guards?
Not that I'm aware.
Okay, so you got backstage, and it's you four, and you saw this bus.
I saw the bus.
What happened next?
And me and Jim walked up to the bus and knocked on it. Now, the girls they've stayed behind. They were maybe 20 yards away, maybe 20 yards, maybe 30. And they were just talking to themselves, and me and Jim knocked on the bus. One of us knocked on the bus, I'm not sure who.
And did you have a discussion about knocking on the bus?
No. I just can't remember who knocked on the bus.
And do you remember why one of you were knocking on the bus?
Oh, we were sure Bob was on the bus, and we were Bob was only off the stage now 15 minutes, and we were sure that Bob was going to come down, and we were going to meet with Bob and give him the songs.
And what happened next?
And then this other guy The driver got off the bus.
How did you know he was the driver?
He told us.
He told you he was the driver?
Yes.
Of the bus?
Yes. Yes, he did. Sorry.
Okay, why don't you tell us exactly what happened after you knocked on the door?
We came off the bus. Came off the bus, and
what do you mean off the bus?
He stepped off the bus.
He did. I'm sorry.
Could he answer this
I
question?
heard him say.
I'm sorry.
No, Mr.
I'm sorry.
Kramer, I
Maybe ask him a question.
Mr. Kramer, I didn't know whether he said he or not. That was the only point.
That's fine. But can we now just hear his answer? Okay, go ahead.
The guy came off the bus, and I asked him if Bob is on the bus. I wanted his autograph, and he says Bob doesn't give autographs. And I remember him saying his last name. I remember asking him if he's any relation to Lou Reed, and he said no. So that's how I'm sure his last name is Reed. First name is Mike, from what I understand.
But you remember it being Reed?
I remember
right now.
Reed for sure. I
And
remember asking him if any relation to Lou.
Did you ask him what his name was, or did he offer his name?
I can't be for sure.
Okay. What happened next?
We want to. I was pretty sure that Bob was on the bus. Don't ask me how. I'm sure I was just, hoping, I guess. A lot of it was. And I'm saying, have him come off and meet us. And he's saying he's not on the bus. This is an equipment bus. And,
Sorry, he is in the equipment bus?
No, this is an equipment bus. And Bob left on a bus a few minutes before. This is an equipment bus.
What do you understand him to mean by an equipment bus?
For the amps and equipment.
Okay. And what happened next?
There was some small talk, and I can't remember everything or what order everything happened in. But we want to give these. He says, "Are these for me or something?" I'm not sure.
Well, let me interrupt you for a minute.
You don't want him to finish his answer?
His answer is finished, Mr. Kramer. Your answer is finished, right?
I'm not sure if it. So what was the question again?
The question is, you're saying you're not sure about exactly what this individual said to you. So I want to back up, okay? So we can make clear that you're testifying what you remember.
Yes, okay. Exactly what I remember. Some stuff, it's vague.
Okay. All we're interested in is what you remember today. So, was there some discussion about the book? Or about the lyrics that you had?
Oh yes.
Who said what first about the lyrics? If you recall.
I'm not sure. I know we made it clear that we want to make sure that Bob gets this book of songs.
And what, if anything, did Mr. Reed say in response?
He said he will make sure that Dylan, he will set them, if he has to, he will set them on his nightstand.
On his nightstand?
Or their dresser, nightstand. In his hotel, he will see them, and he sees them all the time, and it won't be a problem.
You gotta keep your voice up.
It won't be a problem.
It won't be a problem. Sorry.
Mr. Reed allegedly said that he sees Dylan all the time, and he will set, if he has to, he will set the lyrics.
He will make sure, he promised, he swore to us that he swore to us that he will make sure that
Bob gets the songs.
And you said that he said that even if he has to put them on his dresser
He said
or
something about sending them somewhere, and Jim said, no, I want you to hand them to him.
But you testified about a hotel room dresser or nightstand.
He said he mentioned some regard about sending them somewhere, and that wasn't good enough for Jim, and he wanted him to hand them to him. And then I started to hand the songs to Mike. And then I'm not sure if Jimmy grabbed them out of my hand then, or if he took them out of Mike's. I think Mike started to read one of the songs, and then Jimmy just grabbed it out of his hand and started to read the song for him. And he was very impressed by the song. At least he seemed that way. And this is the driver now we're talking about, and he said, oh yeah, that's very good. He loves it, and he will make sure he swore to us.
When you say he swore to us, did he use those words, I swear to you?
Oh, he promised. He promised us.
And did you...
I was totally convinced that he was going to give the songs to Bob. In fact, I was pretty sure that he was on a bus, but what else?
And this is the driver of the equipment bus.
That's what he said.
And you said that the driver of the equipment bus told you that he sees Bob Dylan all the time?
He says he's been driving for him, or something to that effect. He did say.
What did this fellow look like?
Oh, he was a white guy. He was a white guy. He brown hair, and he may have had a mustache. I'm not sure, and he was taller, maybe 6 foot.
Sir, did you ask the driver of the equipment bus how it is that he sees Bob Dylan all the time?
Oh, I don't know. We talked, and I asked him a couple of times for Bob's autograph, because I kept looking back there, and it didn't look like an equipment bus to me. It looked more like a luxury type bus. And in fact, he was looking back. There was a curtain drawn, and it looked like a real nice bus, not an equipment.
You said that he was impressed with the lyrics?
Yes.
Did he actually read some of the lyrics?
What I remember is he started to read them, and maybe it wasn't fast enough for Jim, or it wasn't like the tone that Jimmy would read it, and Jimmy ended up finishing and reading the rest of the song. He just flipped through it and just grabbed a page.
Do you remember what he read?
Songs? No, I don't.
And he read, you said, lyrics for one song?
He read, song, poem, however you might describe it. It was like a short song. It wasn't just like a piece. It was the whole thing, but it was only like a paragraph. I remember looking at it. It was a paragraph this big on a paper,
When you say this big, it's about a couple inches high?
Yeah.
And what, if anything, did the driver of the equipment bus say in response?
Oh, you could just tell he was very impressed by it.
And did this driver say anything to you about being impressed?
He said, I like it a lot. Again, these aren't exact quotes, but he said, I will make sure that Bob gets these songs.
What happened next?
Basically, we gave him the songs. We said, okay, we shook hands. And then by the time we got in the car, I was still convinced that Bob was on the bus, but then again, that's just me. And I remember saying to Jim, they're probably rocking out to My Cousin Joanne right now. That's how I remember that there was a tape in that thing, because I remember saying that to him.
And you have no idea what...
They're probably driving down the highway rocking out to My Cousin Joanne right now. Bob probably is.
Said to Mr. Damiano, I can't help out more than I've helped out. We've had almost a half a dozen conversations. I've asked Bob, that's Bob Dylan.
Yes.
I've asked Bob the questions that you wanted to have asked to Bob. That was a lie, correct?
Yes.
You continue. I've relayed the messages that you wanted me to relay then to Bob. Got that? That was a lie.
Yes.
And going to 153, you agree with me that the statement at the bottom, your last statement, quote, in point of time, quote, then you've got a real gripe with them, period. With these people, period. That's who you have the gripe with, period. You made that statement before you destroyed the faxes, correct?
These conversations were recorded in 1991.
Yes. I just want the jury to be clear about the point of time, that all these statements were made
all of them
prior.
Yes, that is true.
Brad Wright also testifies under oath that on October 16, 1988, he accompanied James Damiano to yet another concert, backstage at Radio City Music Hall, and that James was given backstage passes at this concert. Brad also testifies that someone backstage took James Damiano's songs.
Was Mr. Damiano delusional?
In my opinion, Mr. Damiano was, at the time of these conversations, delusional.
Mr. Mintz, were you present at an interview that was given by Mr. Dillon to Catherine Baker?
I was.
Period. Every so often, you've got to sing songs that are out there, period. You just have to, comma, just to keep yourself straight, period, unquote. Did Mr. Dillon say those words?
Yes.
You then continue without quotes. The other reason for the others is inevitable, colon. He didn't, that's D-I-D-N apostrophe T, as in did not, he didn't have enough material of his own for an album, period, period. Did Mr. Dillon say those words?
I went back in the transcript and I was paraphrasing him, and that's not entirely accurate. He said he didn't have enough songs that he wanted to put on an album.
Mr. Mintz, were you present at an interview that was given by Mr. Dillon to Catherine Baker?
I was.
D-I-D-N apostrophe T, as in did not. He didn't have enough material of his own for an album, period, period. Did Mr. Dillon say those words?
I went back in the transcript and I was paraphrasing him, and that's not entirely accurate. He said he didn't have enough songs that he wanted to put on an album.
Were you present at an interview that was given by Mr. Dillon? Mitch, and again that was your alias that he used, Mitch, I've talked to you, no, K-N-O-W, no, some pretty good attorneys, and they said due to all the litigation on copyright law, on copyrights and copyright infringement, that there would be no possible way, okay, to get that close to Bob Dylan at Jones Beach. They brought me backstage. Dylan walked directly towards me. I handed him the book, and he turned around and got on the bus. Now, you know, I mean, this is my life. You know, I mean, 11 years with CBS. They've taken my songs for 11 years. I requested the material back. They haven't sent my material back through an attorney, okay? On the, I think it was either Under the Red Sky album or Oh Mercy album. There's a film to Catherine.
Quoting now from 0147, where he says, quote, "They brought me backstage. Dylan walked directly toward me. I handed him the book, and he turned around and got on his bus." Then, a sentence later, he indicates, bless you,
question,
11 years with CBS. They've taken my songs for 11 years. I was
It stands to reason that Mr. Tiller is not telling the truth. Why would he only have printed material when James wrote music? In fact, James wrote Bob Dylan's Grammy-nominated song, Dignity.
If you would, so
No, I don't. I couldn't comment on that. Not specific words. Beside that, the impression that I got after this meeting is, I was convinced that Jim is lyrics, and whatever tape that we produce will end up in Bob Dylan's hands. I was convinced of that. That's the only thing I can tell you about that meeting.
Is there anything generally that you remember that was said at this meeting that you haven't already testified to today?
No.
And sir, your testimony is that you invested the $10,000 based in part on what Mr. Tiller said at this meeting.
Yeah, it's based in full.
Based what?
Based in full, and Anthony's meeting.
in full.
So, in fact, this was the first and only time you ever invested money in a music project.
Absolutely.
And so the statements that you say Mr. Tiller made during this meeting were the most critical factor in your whole involvement in this thing.
Yes.
Did you ever say to him or suggest to him that maybe he should bring some of his songs with him?
No, I did not.
Any? Right. Do you deny saying that, or is it you just don't recall one way or the other?
I deny suggesting to Jim that he bring songs along with him. I did, however, concur with him when he asked me, do you think I should bring my songs with me? I said, sure, why not? What could it hurt?
Are those the words you use? Sure, why not? What could it hurt? Mr. Tiller? And when? Miss Capri, were you formerly employed by Mr. Mintz?
Yes.
Okay, and when was that?
I worked for him approximately 7 years.
Okay, and what were those years?
I think it was around 89 till last April.
We're obviously the subject of a claim and destroyed them.
You're referring to them as documents, and I'm referring to them as blank pieces of paper in which you could not read anything on the paper. There'd be no reason for it. I mean, for fingerprint purposes, if the issue was my fingerprint on a
Not
piece
yours. Somebody else's, sir, such as the defendant.
that never crossed my mind. There would be no way that the defendant's fingerprint could ever appear on a piece of paper that came out of my fax machine and went directly into my file cabinet.
Well, I hear you say that, but as you know...
I spoke with Mr. Dillon.
Okay, thank you. And would Mr. Dillon, on occasion, meet with Mr. Mintz in person?
Well, yeah.
We're to clutter the record with your mental impressions about whether you believe he's a good professional or a bad professional, whether you believe you're incredulous or not incredulous.
Well, the point is that...
I don't see... I know what your point is, so you don't have to repeat it.
The point is as plain as the nose on both our faces. I mean, the point is that this gentleman has taken documents, evidence, and destroyed it.
He has done nothing of the kind.
He's taken faxed songs and destroyed them.
There's no evidence that he destroyed any evidence that is of any relevance in this case.
That's a very cavalier comment to make, especially given your position.
There's no evidence of anything of the kind.
Well, just let me make sure I'm clear, so the record is clear. You don't dispute the fact that these were, in fact, and I think you've said it, they came from Mr. Damiano. Yes, these documents, these pieces of paper.
They came to my fax machine. Could I say for an absolute certainty that they came from Mr. Damiano? I couldn't say that for an absolute certainty. Well, it would be my guess that he sent them to me. Okay. It could have come from somebody else, somebody who he was involved with. Possibly.
And just
when you said to him, sir, that they would be kept in a safe place, when you said that to Mr. Damiano, sir, were you lying?
No.
Would it be fair to state that when you said that, you were saying that to give him some measure of comfort?
Yes.
just so we're clear on sequences here. And it was after you said that to him, some point afterwards, that you proceeded to destroy those documents, correct? It wasn't before, it was after. Just so I have my sequence correct.
It was after. I just kind of object to this phrase of destroying the documents.
Well, we'll get to that in a minute, but I just want to get the sequence straight first.
The sequence, yes, is as correct as you've just stated it.
Okay, thank you. Do you recall ever calling Mr. Damiano?
I honestly cannot recall.
How far back do you keep your phone records, sir?
I'm going to object now because if you're about to interrogate this client about calls that other than the two that you've produced, I'm just losing my temper here because
you're unnecessarily losing it.
I'm going to terminate this examination. It's happened before when we've had things at the 11th hour. Fine.
It's nothing like
I will recede.
It's not. I am not.
I saw you looking at a transcript, and I didn't know if you.
Notes. Can I type up some notes?
I think I have reason to be paranoid. Let's go. Go ahead. I apologize if that was.
I'll use a crayon from now on. Okay.
Fine.
So you're not alone.
Fine. Just wanted to put you on notice. That if there's a third call that hasn't been disclosed, this examination's over. But go ahead.
Okay. You made me laugh. That's just
fine. I'm happy to have done that.
I appreciate it.
Because I usually just make you angry.
Okay.
Or amused.
Okay, Mr. Mintz. Do you recall, sir, calling Mr. Damiano in North Carolina?
I don't recall.
Do you recall ever calling Mr. Damiano?
I honestly cannot recall.
How far back do you keep your phone records, sir? Do you recall ever calling Mr. Damiano?
I honestly cannot recall.
How far back do you keep your phone records, sir?
I'm going to object now because if you're about to interrogate this client about calls that other than the two that you've produced, I'm just losing my temper here because
you're unnecessarily losing it.
I'm going to terminate this examination. It's happened before when we've had things at the 11th hour. Fine.
It's nothing like.
I will recede.
It's not. I am not.
I saw you looking at a transcript, and I didn't know if you.
Notes. Can I type up some notes?
I think I have reason to be paranoid. Let's go. Go ahead. I apologize if that was.
I'll use a crayon from now on. Okay.
Fine.
So you're not alone.
Fine. Just wanted to put you on notice. That if there's a third call that hasn't been disclosed, this examination's over. But go ahead.
Okay. You made me laugh. That's just
fine. I'm happy to have done that.
I appreciate it.
Because I usually just make you angry.
Okay.
Or amused.
Okay, Mr. Mintz. Do you recall, sir, calling Mr. Damiano in North Carolina?
I don't recall.
Let me try to refresh your memory, if I may. Sure. Do you recall in this June of '91 calling Mr. Damiano in North Carolina and saying the following to him? Hello, this is Mitch Berman. How are you? The address here is 2934 and a half Beverly Glen Circle, Suite 412, Bel Air, California, 90077. Mr. Damiano repeating it to make sure he got it correctly. You saying yes, that is correct. Do you recall that?
Can I object? And was this something that was turned over to us, a transcript that you're reading from?
It's not a tape, Mr. Snyder.
Was it a note of a conversation that your client gave to you?
Yes.
Deposition's over. We're leaving. We're leaving. Let's go. We're leaving.
You're saying that a communication between me and my client is discoverable?
Your client obviously kept notes from 1991 of a conversation which he didn't turn
that's an inference. That's an inference that you're making, sir. And I would ask you.
You're reading from a transcript now. I'm not looking at it, but I can tell that's what you're doing.
Mr. Snyder, Mr. Snyder, Mr. Snyder. You are jumping to conclusions.
You're reading from a paper, right?
I am reading from a confidential, and I didn't realize I had to do this. I mean, you'd think there'd be some degree of professional courtesy that I wouldn't have to cover my notes.
Your client's been turning over documents late.
Mr. Snyder, and we just found out documents were destroyed. So please, get off your high horse. Get off your high horse, please.
Before the lawsuit was filed, thank you. Blank pieces of paper.
Not blank pieces of paper. Documents that he's contending were illegible.
So what are you saying right now?
Were not blank when they came across the fax line. And what I'm saying, sir, is that a communication from my client to me that he remembers a conversation for you is grounds to terminate a deposition. I would suggest that you do this, sir. Get some air, talk to your partner, and I mean this with all seriousness and sincerity, and tell me whether you really want to terminate this deposition, because I say to you, if you do it at your peril, without basis, and it would be something I think you would regret in a cooler moment.
Fine.
Okay?
Let me ask you this. Your representation is that as you read from whatever you're reading from, your client has no notes of anything that forms the basis of any of these questions?
As I've made clear to you, I am not shy about telling you if my client has not given me something. I've made that clear to you, and you've seen that. Even when it's not to my advantage, I've done that. And you know I've done that.
I know you have.
Okay? And I would not hesitate to do that. All I can tell you is that if I ask my client to recount a conversation, and he does so, and his wife types it,
God bless him.
Why can't I do that?
You're reading, as you know, it appears that you're reading something verbatim of something that happened 5 years ago. And when you start
it's a list of questions.
When you start reading, I'm not asking you to tell me your notes. When you're reading something verbatim, word for word, about a conversation that I had 5 years ago, instead of saying certain substance, did you say the following? But you're literally giving, with adverbs, adjectives, prepositions, word for word, asking whether he said that and the other one said that 5 years ago. It gives us a moment to pause and be concerned that he has notes of those conversations that we haven't been provided with.
Okay, all I can say to you is that I don't have any such notes, and he's not disclosed to me that he has such notes, and I've asked him for such notes. That's all I can say to you.
Exist?
Not to my knowledge. That's all I can. What else can I say to you? All I can do is ask for them. I don't, just like you don't control Mr. Dillon. Right, I have only so much control over my clients, Mr. Damiano among them.
When he gave you the verbatim quote that his wife typed or whatever quote typed for you, did you ask him?
Now you're asking for privileged communications, Mr. Snyder, and I'm not going to get into that.
The obvious disadvantage and unfairness would be, for example, if he had notes that you're unaware of sitting here today, of these conversations, that I wasn't provided, then I would have been unable to give my client those notes to prepare him for this deposition.
I don't have them.
I understand you don't, but you have some verbatim quotes of something that allegedly happened 5 years ago, and
Am I doing it again? No. Okay.
And I just think it's reasonable to inquire whether those notes exist. If they do, I think it's only fair that this witness not be forced to answer questions about conversations for which there are notes.
I will do this. I can page my client, give him this phone number here,
and then we'll move on to another conversation.
The subject to,
Fine.
Is that fair?
That's fair.
Okay. Can we do that?
Thank you.
Sure.
Your phone.
Some water?
Thank you.
Check off the record, Counsel.
Yes, glass water be nice.
The time is 4:47 p.m. and we're going off the record.
Your phone.
Some water?
Thank you.
Check off the record, Counsel.
Yes, glass water be nice.
The time is 4:47 p.m. and we're going off the record. It's 4:52 p.m. and we're back on the record.
Mr. Kramer, you asked me whenever these things came to my mind about the mistruths.
Yes.
Just to place that in context, I want you to know that because